Hi, Mrs. Rittenauer here, back with another episode of Teaching Lit with Mrs. Ritt. So in one of the previous videos, we talked a little bit about how figurative language works in a similar way to a math equation, and that on one side you have a literal reference, something that we can something that we are physically describing, something that we are experiencing in that moment, whether it's a person, place, thing, or idea. It's what we are really trying to describe. It's what we're experiencing. But on the other side of that equation, we are talking about figurative comparison. So if I want somebody to understand what something I am feeling feels like, I might say the orange felt like goosebumps in my hand. So the orange is the literal thing that I'm trying to describe. The figurative thing would be goosebumps. I'm not really feeling goosebumps, I'm feeling the orange. The orange is the literal thing, right? So we're going to apply this now to similes and metaphors. So we're going to start with similes and metaphors because they both function in a very similar way. We know that similes use like or as, usually, sometimes than, to make comparisons between two things, and we know that metaphors are just direct comparisons. But both of these things are trying to compare some kind of concrete thing, something that I'm experiencing, something that I'm touching, something that I'm feeling at this moment, with something that is also concrete, but maybe not figurative, not literally present at that moment. So it's figurative. So I'm going to use the example of the poem written by Emily Dickinson called "There Is No Frigate Like a Book." So I don't know if you've read it. Really short poem, really cool poem. But if we don't understand what is literally being explained and kind of analyzed, then we are going to get the simile, we're going to get the figurative language, we're going to get the metaphor, we're going to get those things wrong. And so we have to know that they're not interchangeable. There is something that is literally being described and it's being compared to something in my mind. And so we have to know what's the difference. So if we look at the first line, the first two lines, let's look at the first two lines in the poem. She wrote, "There is no frigate like a book to take us lands away." So we know that this is a simile because of the word like, but what's being compared to what? Now, I like to give this poem on a quick comprehension quiz in my class just to see if students really do know what figurative language is and how it works. And this one usually throws kids for a loop if they're not being careful and paying attention. Why? Because we're normally taught that the first thing is being compared to the second thing. And that's not always true. In this case, if the first thing was being compared to the second thing, here's what we would have. We would have a frigate, which is a ship. We would be comparing that frigate to a book. Now, why would I do that? I'm trying to tell you something about this thing that I'm looking at, this thing that I'm experiencing right now, by comparing it to something else that we both can describe and talk about and understand together. So if I literally am describing a ship, why would I compare it to a book? Here, the author, Emily Dickinson, is trying to tell us that whatever it is takes us lands away, right? So we know that ships take us lands away. We know that already, but that's not what she's describing. How do I know? Because if I look down into the next line, the next two lines, she furthers this comparison and she says, "Nor any coursers like a page of prancing poetry." Well, if you look up what coursers are horses that are used to pull carriages. And she's saying that there aren't coursers like a page of poetry. So what's she trying to get me to understand? What image does she want me to have in my head? Does she want me to understand what a ship is like? Does she want me to understand what those coursers, what those horses are like? Nope. What she's describing to me is what it's like to read. What it's like to read a book. When you read a book, it is like being on a ship, a frigate. This book is like a ship. It can take you all kinds of places. You don't have to remain in one spot. Physically you do, but mentally the book is taking you places much like a frigate would. And then if we continue that comparison into the next two lines, there's nothing like poetry. Poetry that is like horses. Prancing poetry. Think about how poetry sounds and just the lighthearted rhythm sometimes of it, and how it can be like horses that when they're clip-clopping across a road, or you're watching them pick up their feet and go in rhythm. Poetry is doing that same thing. So you have to be very careful, and you have to know which side is which. If we mess this up, then we don't understand what she's explaining in this poem. So we have to make sure that we are really careful in identifying what it is that the author is describing. What is the literal thing? And then what is the author comparing it to? When we know what the literal thing is, and we know what she's comparing it to, then we can start to form a much more accurate picture of the intended image and the intended meaning of the poem. So that's one of the ways that I like to teach similes and metaphors and make sure that my students understand what's going on. I hope this helps. I hope this is just another tool in your toolbox. If you have any other specific literary terms or techniques that you're interested in me exploring, please let me know. In the meantime, have a good day and enjoy those books that are taking you places.